If you thought that, in 2025, America, a black woman, could peacefully live in a respectable neighborhood, then you've never visited Cherry Blossom Estates. Their everything is suspiciously coordinated. White fences, whiter than porcelain veneers, lawns trimmed more precisely than an elementary school buzz cut, and the residents, paler than the sunscreen ad for SPF 1000. On a sunny March morning, Charlene and her husband, Raymond Bigsby, drove their old Toyota through the automated iron gates where every car was scanned more thoroughly than airport security. Charlene, 42. A high school math teacher had a reputation for terrifying students with trigonometry, but being beloved for her painfully honest warmth. Raymond, a software engineer, was quiet, but could end entire boardroom arguments with one perfectly timed glare. They didn't move here chasing the white picket fence American dream or weekend BBQs. They came as part of a federal resettlement program for educators and tech workers in strategic residential zones. They weren't here to blend in. They were here to live. But 4 minutes after turning onto the main road, under a wooden sign engraved, "Neighborliness is an asset," they knew that asset did not include them. A white elderly woman watering her roses froze midstream, her hose spraying wildly like a riot drill. A golf-attired old man stared unblinking as if the security camera had linked directly to his cortex, and a white child on a scooter, upon seeing them, darted back indoors like Charlene had shown up with a Komodo dragon. Charlene said nothing. She didn't have to. In places like this, silence isn't peace. It's the way people say, "We don't need anyone who looks like you," but say it with eye contact hedges and HOA flyers you'll never receive. On Wednesday morning, sunlight poured across the velvet-smooth lawn. Charlene had spent 2 weekends restoring after discovering that the soil here only favored white flowers and matching philosophies. She stepped outside wearing a wide-brimmed hat, holding a cup of ginger honey tea, and began watering her sunflowers, each trying to grow in an air thick with delicate scrutiny. Then came the black SUV, no HOA plates, no resident decal. Just stopped directly across her driveway, like they were quarantining a level 4 biohazard. 2 men stepped out, tall white blue shirts, and the kind of posture that screams graduated top of their class at the pretty intimidating academy. The first man, slicked back hair, tinted aviators, spoke like he was auditioning for a graduation speech in threatening studies. Ma'am, this property is under the jurisdiction of the Cherry Blossom Estates residents. Council, you re-watering dangerously close to the visual boundary line that is considered a disruption to the neighborhood, aesthetic harmony. Charlene didn't answer right away. She bent down, plucked a yellowing leaf, then looked up slowly and spoke with the voice of someone who has taught 27 middle schoolers trig without ever raising her voice. Did you just say, "I am a visual threat"? The second man, shorter, leaning sideways, hand near his hip, like imagining a gun, watched her. Charlene looked at the hose in her hand and thought, if only this thing could spray reason into people's brains, maybe lawyers wouldn't have so much work. Raymond, who had been checking the automatic sprinkler system, heard the commotion and stepped outside. He didn't say a word, just leaned against the door frame, arms crossed with the look of a man who'd have been asked, "Are you sure you're at the right house?" on his own front porch. The air stretched taut, like a violin string, but Charlene continued watering her plants, as if she were in the middle of a sitcom scene, one where the main character calmly pushes back against racism using nothing but water pressure. They thought a black teacher holding a garden hose was a threat. But maybe what truly scared them was a woman who refused to stay silent. That day, Charlene had no plans to provoke the neighborhood with any dramatic display. She simply stepped outside to collect the morning paper, the kind of paper that was delivered with atomic clock precision. Except to her house, of course. Beneath the paper was a brown envelope. No address, no postage, no return name. Just a single line printed in cold, aligned black letters like something off the printer of a Bond villain. This neighborhood is for decent people, not for those with guns and skin like yours. No exclamation marks, no typos, no trembling handwriting, just a chilling stillness, the kind only people familiar with conditional civility could recognize. Charlene didn't crumple the letter. She didn't tremble, didn't look around, didn't call anyone. Instead, she folded it neatly and slipped it into her back pocket like it was an unpaid water bill. Not because she was numb, but because she was used to threats that never stood upright enough to be called threats. In Maplewood Palms, racism doesn't shout. It works through omissions. No invites to the block meetings. Trash bins pulled back out after you've already tucked them in. Slow strolls past your yard like they re-inspecting your grass. And incidentally, your melanin levels. Raymond, a man once familiar with minefields and firepower, was now installing security cameras along the fence like second nature. Not because he was afraid, but because he understood the most persistent threats are the quiet ones. And Charlene, she didn't say a word to her husband about the letter. Not because she was hiding it, but because she'd grown used to receiving invoices from reality just for existing. There are words that don't need to be spoken. There are battles that don't begin with fists, but with unreturned greetings, unsigned letters, and curated silences. Charlene knew, and she was ready. Tuesday afternoon. A breeze passed through Maplewood Palms, carrying the scent of jasmine, a suffocating hush, and the rattling wheels of a cheap plastic toy car. Charlene was walking through the Central Park, not to relax, but to observe, to listen for the things that weren't being said, just like she used to do in strategy briefings in Syria, where threats didn't wear uniforms, but white button-downs and carried cappuccinos. Under a maple tree, she saw a young boy, gray hoodie, curly hair, clutching a plastic toy police car. Sitting still, not crying, not smiling, just watching. "You just moved in." "Huh?" he asked, voice so small it sounded like he was afraid of hearing it himself. Charlene nodded. "Yeah, I am. Charlene, I am Darius Hill. But around here, they call me the kid from the red roof house." Charlene recognized it. Last house on the street. The only one where white parents were raising a black child, and nobody had ever spoken to them at a block party. Darius stared at her a moment longer, then said, "No hesitation, no fluff, no need for a social skills workshop. You know, I'm the only one here who looks like you." Silence. Not the everyone's busy kind. The kind that says, everyone sees it, no one says it. Charlene sat down next to him. No lecture, no head pats. Because she knew when a child speaks the truth, that adults keep running from, the best thing you can do is listen. Darius told her about being shoved out of the sandbox, about how his toy police car had once been snatched with the words, "Brown kids, can be cops." That says, against the rules. Charlene felt something tighten in her chest. not from shock, but from familiarity. Because she had heard the same things from grown mouths in theaters, in supermarkets, in national security briefings. Now it came back from the voice of an 8-year-old. "I'm glad you came," the boy said. "I hope you all stay. If someone like me lives here, maybe I want to feel so alone anymore." Charlene swallowed hard. She had once pulled comrades out of mortar fire, but no one had ever asked her to be a friend just because of her skin. And for that very reason, she understood loneliness doesn't start when you re-unwelcome. It starts when you learn to live with it at the age of 8. Darius didn't need a speech. He just needed someone to believe in. And Charlene, simply by showing up, had become what many adults in Maplewood Palms had never been, a reason for a black child to believe he wasn't a mistake in the system Wednesday morning. The sunlight shimmered through the leaves like the opening shot of a romantic comedy, if you ignored the part where a black woman holding a garden hose was staring down the barrel of a gun. Charlene stood in her front yard, watering her roses. No sweat, no strain, just tending to her garden, like the fertilizer bag. Instructions said. Suddenly, a black SUV with no plates came growling up the street, like it was late for a belly dancing class. It screeched to a stop right outside her gate. 2 men stepped out, one tall, one short. One looked like a cop who had lost his ID at the dry cleaner-s. The other, like an undercover agent in a spy movie, who forgot to turn off his GPS. No greetings, no badges, no clear authority. This property belongs to the HOA. "You re-trespassing," yelled the tall one, who Charlene would later refer to as Travis, no shame, and drew his gun. Charlene didn't flinch. Not because she was frozen in fear, but because she had seen men like this before, from the deserts of the Middle East to the backyards of Ohio. Men who believed that wearing a uniform, real or fake, was a license to dominate. She looked down at the gun, then at his wrist. No badge, no comms device, no insignia. The radio was a knockoff, the kind sold 2 for $1 at flea markets. The other guy, Kyle, just watching, began drifting around to the side porch like he was scouting for cameras. Ah, of course, this wasn't a security check. This was a poorly written play, and she was the uninvited extra. Charlene shifted slightly, just enough to step out of the direct line of fire, still holding the hose as if weighing whether peppermint water might help. Travis, think more clearly. "You have 3 seconds to raise your hands," Travis barked. "And you have 3 to lower that weapon, unless you want to be charged with armed threat and impersonating an officer," Charlene replied, voice calm, like she was ordering iced tea. Travis sneered, the kind of sneer worn by men who believe white skin gun equals power. "You think you can threaten me, you worker, a housewife with a garden hose?" Charlene didn't answer. She just stepped forward just enough to show she wasn't stepping back. Inside the house, Marcus, her husband, stood behind the door, phone in hand, camera aimed at the yard. Charlene knew, and that's why she didn't move. Because she didn't need to shout to make an impact. She just needed to let them reveal who they were. The breeze stirred. A petal floated down onto the grass. No blood, no gunshots, but tension, thicker than any battlefield. Travis kept his gun raised, but his hand was trembling. Kyle backed up, eyes darting like he was looking for an escape route from a scene he wrote himself. Charlene didn't scowl, didn't tremble. Only one thing showed in her eyes: disappointment. Not because they saw her as a threat, but because they thought she wouldn't stand firm. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was a moment when the entire neighborhood had to peek through their curtains and ask themselves, did we just see something we've spent years pretending not to? Some people need guns to feel powerful. Charlene only needed a box. A steel box buried beneath a bush of crimson-red roses, the kind the HOA once complained were not in keeping with the landscape palette. They thought she planted flowers for decoration. They didn't know she planted them to cover evidence. As Kyle began trembling, and Travis kept gripping his gun like it was the last business card proving he mattered. Charlene didn't say a word. She stepped lightly toward the flower bed, careful as if tending a new seedling or a scandal about to erupt. A soft click broke the silence. Her hand brushed aside the decorative gravel, revealing a thin wooden panel. She lifted it like pulling back a stage curtain. Underneath was a steel gray box, unscuffed, unrusted, no dangling lock, just a code pad. She pressed 4 digits. No rush, no hesitation. Click. Open. Inside was a leather-bound file folder stamped with the seal of the United States Department of Defense. Travis backed away. Kyle nearly dropped to his knees. This is a resettlement contract under Clause 47B of the National Security Confidentiality Program, Charlene said, voice even and cold as a Pentagon slideshow. This home is federal property, which means anyone who steps onto it without clearance and points a gun at an active federal officer doesn't get dealt with by the HOA. The DOJ sends people to have a chat. Across the yard, Marcus kept filming. No words, no smile, just documenting the moment. 2 cosplay officers turned themselves into federal evidence. I was just following orders, Travis stammered, lowering the gun for the first time like releasing a deflated life preserver. Charlene didn't scold, didn't preach. She placed the file on the hood of their car as gently as placing down a utility bill. Next time, Dante, bring a gun. Bring the law, she said, her voice lighter than the breeze, but heavier than any punch. A gust of wind blew past. The roses swayed. Curtains parted slightly across every house on the street, as if the entire neighborhood was trying to make sense of what they just witnessed. And the answer was simple. They had just seen a black woman who didn't need to yell, didn't need to slam the table. She just opened a box, and the entire racist system collapsed like a castle built from Excel sheets and prejudice. Across the street, curtains twitched like eyelids, blinking at something unbelievable. Kyle lay curled on the lawn like an expired toolkit. Travis, once self-proclaimed messenger of order, now shook harder than a laggy live stream. Charlene stood still, didn't reach for her phone, didn't call 911. She simply touched the collar of her blouse, where a tiny military-grade mic had been sewn in since the day she moved in. Bravo 9 to Sentinel, confirm 2 armed impersonators threatening federal personnel at Resettlement Site 143, request support, and visual verification team. Travis jolted like someone had just read his name off a college rejection list. He had thought that Mike was a Bluetooth headset. He didn't know. It was a military-grade internal transmitter, and Sentinel wasn't a K-pop band. It was the Department of Defense Emergency Command Center. Second-click Sentinel confirm Tier 2 threat. 2 armed suspects. Potential resistance suspected. Ties to rogue HOA operations. Deploy reinforcements. Inside the house, Marcus stepped out, still holding the phone to his shoulder. Camera, live streaming a wide shot of the front yard with a bright red caption, DOJ secure, feed federal evidence. That morning, the sun wasn't shining brilliantly. The light was just enough to dry the front steps, where Charlene now calmly sipped tea as if no one had ever aimed a gun at her for watering the wrong kind of plants. Next to the teacup sat a white envelope with no return address, no logo, just one neatly written line in blue ink. To Ms. Charlene Brooks. Inside was a short note, simple and clean, without flourish or harshness. But every word hit like a strike to the spine. Thank you. Last night my son slept peacefully for the first time in 3 months. No more dreams of sirens or doors being kicked open. He only dreamed of being saluted like a soldier. No guns pointed. No one telling him he was in the wrong neighborhood. Charlene sat still for a few seconds, not because she was surprised, but because she knew that moment made every bruise she had carried from the battlefield worth it. The letter didn't end with polite thank you, but with an admission. The entire neighborhood of Windrow Pines had long avoided, like a contagious disease. I used to think I was weak, because all I could do was hold my son and not know what to say. But thanks to you, I understand. Courage isn't shouting. It's standing still when the world wants you to disappear. Charlene folded the letter. She didn't cry. She didn't save it for Facebook. She simply placed it in a small wooden box beside others, letters from neighbors who had since resigned from the HOA, from the local librarian who'd moved multicultural books to the front shelf. She told Marcus, no need to reply. Just keep it. At the end of that street, one afternoon, a boy named Jaden, curly-haired, bright-eyed, clutching a toy police car, walked up to Charlene's porch. Miss Charlene, I drew this for you. A slightly wrinkled A4 paper drawn in crayon on it, a brown-skinned woman in a buttoned-up shirt, with a tiny mic on her collar, standing next to a little boy in a police uniform, both smiling wide. At the top, scrawled in childlike handwriting, You are the first person who made me not want to run away from my dreams. Charlene smiled. Not big, but just enough for the world to know she understood. No street signs were renamed. No talk shows erected statues in her honor. No one patted her on the back and said, You are a hero. But from that day on, curtains no longer closed when she stepped out to water her flowers. Jaden went to school without hiding his toy police car, and HOAs across the state started receiving compliance check emails from the Department of the Interior. Charlene declined every interview, not because she feared the spotlight, but as she once said, if truth needs a microphone to survive it, it's weaker than we thought. She still rose early, watered her plants, changed the flowers in the vase, read the morning paper. But now, people who passed by greeted her, not out of fear, but because no one could pretend not to see her anymore. And the most important thing, Jaden no longer asked, why is my skin different from theirs? Now he asked, can I really become a real police officer someday? And for the first time, Charlene could answer without a hint of hesitation. Yes, you can, as long as you remember, wearing the uniform is easy, but standing for what's right, even when you are alone, that S, what makes a real officer, and that S, how this battle ended. Not with blood, but with evidence. But not with power, but with legitimacy. Not with an explosion, but with a dream that no longer woke up in fear. If you've ever felt small, like you couldn't change anything, remember a woman watering her flowers, and a little boy who dared to say, "Don T hurt her, she's nice." That alone was enough to make the whole system take a long, hard look in the mirror. A quick pan of the camera toward Travis. The shot looked like something out of a documentary. Him, sweat soaking through his shirt, still holding a gun. He no longer knew what to do. Would do with. Charlene looked straight at him. No insults, no threats. She just asked one question slowly, like she was teaching a class. Do you know what happens when the Department of Justice receives footage of two men impersonating officers pulling a gun on a national security personnel in a federal housing zone? Travis didn't answer. He couldn't spin the story anymore. His sweat dripped like a leaky faucet, each drop a dawning realization. "I'm done," Kyle groaned beside him, trying to crawl back toward the SUV. But his knees clearly hadn't been updated with the latest patch. Charlene calmly walked over, adjusted the folder still resting on their hood. "Who sent you? Who signed the order? Who thought they could trespass into my house and walk away like nothing happened?" Travis opened his mouth, then shut it. He didn't know what was worse, giving up his boss's name or staying silent and falling into a bigger trap. And just then, Sentinel confirms, "Bravo 9 signal, response team en route, ETA 3 minutes. Maintain the scene." 30 seconds later, sirens began to wail from the end of the street. Curtains snapped shut, like masks being ripped off. The screeching of tires on smooth pavement sounded like the opening score to the execution of deep-seated prejudice. The sirens didn't sound like a warning. They sounded like justice, waking up after a decade-long nap. The first car turned neatly into Windrow Pines Main Road. The second was a DOJ Rapid Response Unit, not an SUV with an HOA logo printed from Canva, but the kind with license plates made for people who Dante daydream. In the yard, Kyle had practically merged with the grass. Travis was still standing, but his gun now hung at thigh level as if even the weapon was ashamed of who was holding it. Charlene said nothing. She simply stood there. No need to shout. Told you so. Just her gaze toward the main gate was enough for the entire Windrow Pines community to realize they were entering a post-delusion era. The third SUV rolled in. No logo, no siren, just a female journalist silently live-streaming from the passenger seat, previously known for getting 3 city council members ousted with a single 900-word article. "Hello, HOA, meet the media." When the federal agents stepped out, they didn't ask, "Who called?" They just looked at Marcus, still holding his phone, live stream running the bright red caption beneath the frame, "DOJ active feed, federal personnel threat, level confirmed." Travis now looked like a remote with its batteries pulled out. He stood there, scanning the area for someone to save him. But all around him now was green grass, shame, and the stares of a community whose mask had just been ripped off. Kyle, still crawling toward the car, moved like a child reaching for a warm blanket after being caught in a lie. The federal officers approached. There was no, "You are under arrest for," didn't need to be. Just one motion, hands behind the back. The handcuffs clicking shut, with the kind of cold finality that feels like the universe rendering judgment. Travis didn't resist. He knew. He knew that from the moment he stepped out of that black SUV and pointed a gun at a woman. Some people need guns to feel powerful. Charlene just needed a box. A metal box buried beneath the deep red rosebush that the HOA once complained was inconsistent with the landscape color palette. They thought she planted flowers for decoration. They didn't know she planted them to conceal evidence. As Kyle began trembling and Travis still clung to his gun, like it was the last business card proving his worth. Charlene didn't say a word. She stepped lightly toward the flower bed carefully, as if tending to a new seedling, or an imminent scandal. Click! She brushed aside the decorative stones, revealing a thin wooden panel, lifted it like drawing the curtain on a stage. Beneath it, a gray metal box, unscratched, unrusted with a digital lock, instead of a latch. 4 digits. No hurry, no hesitation, unlocked. Inside, a leather-bound file folder stamped Department of Defense of the United States. Travis backed away. Kyle nearly collapsed to his knees. This is a relocation contract under Clause 47B of the National Security Confidential Housing Program. Charlene said, her tone steady and cold, like a Pentagon PowerPoint slide. This house is federal property. That means anyone entering without authorization, especially while aiming a weapon at an active duty officer, one to be handled by the HOA. The DOJ will send someone for a chat. Across the yard, Marcus kept filming. No words, no smiles, just capturing every second these 2 cosplay officers were turning themselves into federal evidence. I was just following orders, Travis stammered, lowering the gun for the first time like he'd just dropped a leaky life raft. Charlene didn't scold, didn't lecture. She gently placed the file folder on the hood of their SUV, like handing over a utility bill. Next time, Don T, bring a gun, bring a lawyer. Her words were lighter than the breeze, but heavier than any punch. A breeze passed. The roses trembled. Curtains fluttered open across every nearby home, as if the entire neighborhood was trying to understand. What did we just witness? The answer was simple. You just saw a black woman who didn't need to shout, didn't need to slam fists on a table. She just opened a box, and the whole system of racial bias crumbled like a spreadsheet castle built on prejudice. Across the street, the curtains still twitched like eyelids, reacting to something unbelievable. Kyle lay curled in the grass, like a tool bag past expiration. Travis, once proud to call himself a messenger of order, now shook harder than a lagging live stream. Charlene stood still, didn't pull out a phone, didn't call 911. She simply touched the collar of her shirt, where a tiny internal mic had been sewn in since the day they moved in. Bravo 9 to Sentinel. Confirm. 2 armed impersonators threatening federal personnel at Settlement Code 143. Request support and image verification team. Travis flinched like someone had just read his name off a college rejection list. That mic, he thought it was a Bluetooth headset. He didn't know. It was a military-grade communication device. And Sentinel wasn't a K-pop group. It was the Department of Defense. SS, Rapid Incident Command Line. Second press. Sentinel, confirm. Level 2 status. 2 armed individuals. Possible resistance, suspected links to impersonator HOA network. Send reinforcements. Inside the house, Marcus stepped out, still holding the phone on his shoulder camera, live streaming a full view of the yard, with the bright red banner, DOJ Secure Feed, Federal Evidence Level Active. That morning, the sky wasn't bright. The sun only shone enough to dry the porch, where Charlene calmly sipped tea like nobody had ever pointed a gun at her for watering the wrong kind of plants.